Okay, welcome to the October 24th webinar titled Becoming Your Industry's Newsmaker. First, I'd like to start by giving you a brief background about Albers Communications Group. We are a full-service public relations, social media, and marketing communications agency based in Omaha, Nebraska, with clients located in almost every state. We at Albers Communications strongly believe that PR and social media should go hand in hand, and we believe that both of those disciplines work best when used as part of an integrated communication strategy. And we work with our clients to develop communications plans that really try to leverage multiple channels, both channels offline and online. And today, of course, we're going to be focusing specifically on inserting yourself, your business, your organization into the headlines, becoming a newsmaker. Again, I am president of Albers Communications Group, and I wanted to mention that there are really multiple ways that you can follow us after today's webinar and receive ongoing news about best practices regarding both PR and social media. So you can follow us on Twitter. On screen you see our Twitter handle. You can like us on Facebook, and again our Facebook address is on screen. We also have a blog, and there are multiple members of the Albers Communications professional staff that blog on a regular basis. Again, we're talking about things such as best practices and trends in social media and public relations. Regarding my role with our team of PR and social media specialists, I really oversee our team to make sure that we are staying on top of the trends in our industry. But honestly, one of my passions has always been working with the news media. It's really what attracted me to the public relations field 20 years ago. And today I look forward to sharing with you some of the best practices that I've picked up over my career. And I also want to give thanks to Danny Hatfield, who's a member of our professional staff. She's a PR specialist. And Danny worked several years in a newsroom, and so this presentation is really reflective of her experience working in a newsroom and my experience working on the public relations side of things. I always like to start these types of presentations with a roadmap. What are we going to cover today? So today, in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to look at why is it important, why should you even care to try to insert your business or your organization into the news process and make headlines for yourself. Then we're going to look at the how-tos, and this is really the meat of our presentation. The heart of our presentation is we've identified really 4 practical steps as to how you can insert yourself and frankly differentiate yourself from the competition by becoming that expert source for the media. The third point we want to cover today is we realize that not all of you have big public relations departments. Many of you work with us as your PR firm. Some of you have individuals on your staff that you lean to do your public relations. But it's important, I think, for you as business owners to know how you can be of value to your PR team, because regardless of whether you have somebody on your staff doing PR or whether you use a PR firm, it really takes a group effort, and we're going to talk about the things that you can do as a business owner to really help the process. And then we're going to close with questions. Again, a reminder that you can chat in questions using the chat function that is located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I think it's really important to start today's content by looking at the 3 different types of media exposure that you can achieve for your business. The first off is paid media exposure. Of course, what we're talking about there is advertising. So that could be TV advertising, it could be print advertising, it could be billboards, it could be web advertising, you name it. If you're paying for the space, then it's paid exposure. The second type of exposure is, frankly, something that we don't talk a lot about, but it's called owned media exposure. And these are the channels that you own as a business. It could be your website, it could be your blog, it could be your newsletters, whether they be email newsletters or print newsletters. So you own those, you control the content, and of course you pay for the distribution of those. And then the third one, and the one that we're going to spend all of our time talking about today, is what we call earned exposure. And what we're talking about when we say earned exposure is that free exposure that's available to you through the news media. And when we say the news media, that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean TV exposure, it can mean radio exposure, newspapers, of course. It can also mean trade publications that perhaps follow your industry. It could also mean blogs. A blog could be an owned outlet, like you might have your own blog, like we have a blog for Albers Communications Group, but there are also bloggers out there that might be writing relevant content to your business and your industry that you want to try to achieve earned exposure through. So I think that's an important thing to understand. Now what's important to understand is the why. So we're going to transition to, okay, so if we've made the decision to pursue earned media exposure, why? What are the benefits to you? Well, one of the main benefits is it's credible. When the media uses you as a source for a news story, they are essentially endorsing you as an expert. Another reason media exposure is important is because it's memorable. When you are quoted in a news story, along with a lot of times you're quoted with your clients, it makes a very emotional connection with those people that are viewing that story or reading that story. And it's really a great way to differentiate yourself from the competition. If you think about it, people are much, much more likely to remember when you're in the newspaper, quoted in a news story, versus when you take out an ad. The third point is that this type of exposure, the news media exposure, is very lasting. And one of the things that's happened over the last probably 8 to 10 years in our business is that the media, of course, is really porting everything online. Regardless of whether they're a more traditional media outlet like a newspaper, they're all getting involved in the online space. And as a result of that, what we're finding is that most of the news stories that we place quoting our clients can be found online, and it gives a tremendous boost to your search engine optimization efforts. So these things work hand in hand together very well. And then finally, let's not forget an important thing about this type of earned media exposure is that it's free. It's free from the perspective of you're not paying for the space. Now, is there an investment? Absolutely. There's an investment in your time. There's an investment if you're using a resource like ourselves, or if you're using somebody on your staff. Of course, there's an investment to make, but the space itself is free to you. And if you're not, the bottom line to me is, if you're not achieving media exposure for yourself about topics that are relevant to your industry, guess who is achieving that exposure? Well, your competition probably is. So to me, it's like real estate. There's only so much available, and if you're not grabbing your fair share, then your competition is probably doing that. Now let's get to the heart of our presentation, which is the how. So how are the ways that you can create media exposure for yourself? And I'm going to go through each of these questions that Danny and I put together, and I'm going to share with you some real-life examples of how we've seen this play out in the marketplace. And what I want you to do, my request for you is, as we're talking through these areas, think in terms of your own business. So when I give an example, think of how that could apply to your own business and jot notes to yourself. So the 4 questions we need to ask ourselves is, how am I an expert in my industry? And then the next question we need to ask ourselves is, what are we doing as a business to benefit the community? Because the media likes to tell stories about things that the community can benefit from. And then the third question is, what's new? Right? The old expression is we call it news, right? We don't call it olds. So We need to always think in terms of what is happening in our community, in our business, in our industry that is new. And then the fourth question, honestly, I can bet almost nobody thinks about this when they think of social media. How is my social media presence enticing? And we're not talking about enticing to your clients. You know, most people view social media, and rightfully so, through the lens of their clients or the referral sources, like Facebook, Twitter, those sorts of channels. But what we're suggesting is that you also think in terms of how is it enticing to the news media, because one of the things we're going to talk about is the fact that newsrooms are shrinking, the resources are more limited than they've ever been, and they honestly go fishing for story ideas. And one of the places they look is they look at the social media feeds coming from local businesses, and we'll give you some examples on that. So with that, let's address the first question, which is, how are you an expert? Well, one of the things that you can look at to create the expert status with yourself and the news media is, what kind of primary and industry research can you bring to the table? Just a clarification, when we say primary, primary means it was developed firsthand by you. It could be trends that you're seeing with your client base, or perhaps you've done some research on your own. So that's what we mean by primary. It's just firsthand. And so what are some of the areas that we might look to underneath the topic of research? Well, one of the things that we would suggest you look at is trends, specifically sales trends. Farmers National Company is a client of ours, and they're the largest farm real estate company in the country, and they have a presence in many, many states throughout the midsection of the country. And one of the things that we've done for them over the last several years is tie into the trend of farmland values, because over the last 10 years or so, farmland values have increased dramatically over that period. So looking at those types of trends can be a way to create exposure for yourself. Excuse me. Another source for you to look at are trade associations. Many of you belong to associations within your particular industries, and often you'll find that these trade associations do research on your behalf as a member of the trends that are happening within your particular industry. So look to your trade associations for trends. And then finally, the government has a wealth of resources, whether you're talking about census information or whether you're talking about employment trends. There's all sorts of information that's available from the federal government. We used to do some work for an employment training organization based in Washington, D.C., and every month we would look at the unemployment figures and tie into the trends that those were painting for us to try to get our clients interviewed about those topics and those trends. So I wanted to show you an example of how this plays out in real life. One of our clients is Verizon Wireless, and what we did was we found some research from a Nielsen survey that said that 79% of U.S. smartphone and tablet users have used their mobile devices for shopping-related activities. What we did was we took that nugget from Nielsen and we pitched it out to the media markets in which we work for Verizon Wireless. And on screen is an example of a story that hit in the TV market. It was the NBC affiliate in North Platte, Nebraska. And with our webinar platform, I don't have the ability to show you a moving video, but this is actually a real TV story. What I'm showing you is the story as it appeared on their website. And you can see circled in red is the quote from the Verizon Wireless store manager in North Platte, Nebraska. Now, one of the things I want to point out about this particular story is that, you know, frankly, this story could have been sourced by any wireless company, but the fact that we pushed this research out, and again, it was research that we got from a second party, we were able to put our expertise, the expertise of Verizon Wireless, into the news cycle. Another way that you can be an expert is by sharing your solutions to people's problems. The bottom line to most businesses is that you solve a problem. Either you solve a problem for a business if you're a B2B business, or you solve a problem for consumers if you're a B2C business. And ultimately, you can turn your solutions to people's problems into headlines. And I have a couple examples that I want to share with you that demonstrate this. One of our clients is a company called Sunco, who is a leading sprinkler and lawn care company. And what we did a few weeks ago was we tied into the fact that a hard freeze was coming. They're headquartered in Omaha. So we tied into the fact that a hard freeze was coming, and we pitched out a story about how people should prepare their sprinkler systems. Again, we're solving a problem for the viewers of this TV station. And this story, again, quoted and interviewed Jason Wilson, who is a spokesperson for our client. And, you know, it's the same with the example that I shared about Verizon Wireless. This could have been sourced by really any sprinkler company, but the fact that we took advantage of something timely, the fact that a frost was coming, and we took advantage of our client's expertise, we were able to insert them into the news process. Another example I want to share about solving people's problems is a story that we worked on for another client of ours, which is Merry Maids. We work with Merry Maids franchise owners across the country. And I know we have listeners today from all around the country, but in many parts of the country, this fall was pretty bad for allergies. And so we leveraged this for news media exposure for Merry Maids by putting out a story about how you as a homeowner can allergy-proof your home. And this story that I'm showing was from Charlotte, North Carolina. And again, in red, we circled the fact that the franchise owner there was interviewed on camera, and a story did hit in WB-TV in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it was great exposure. And, you know, to reiterate the point that I made earlier about how all of these stories live online, this story lives online. And you can see that 20 people up here, if you look on screen, 20 people recommended this story to their friends. And so not only did we get the exposure when that TV story hit, but our client also got the benefit of the fact that this was very shareable on social media. It was content that people felt compelled to share with their friends on social media, especially Facebook. So the next question, the second question we need to ask ourselves is, what is it that we do to benefit the community? Do you as an organization participate in things such as community cleanup days? Do you present educational events? Or do you do things on site like sponsor a blood drive? These are all great ways to get your business name out there and make an emotional connection with your community. It's also, frankly, good for business. In a recent survey, 87% of consumers said that they would be likely to switch from one brand to another brand if that new brand was associated with a good cause. And so this is good for business. Plus, these sorts of events are easy for journalists. Danny said that in her career in the news business, they called these one-stop shops. The reason they're one-stop shops for reporters is that a reporter can just go out to the event, report their story, and be done with it. They don't have to do a lot of background. They don't have to do a lot of individual interviews and research and digging. So do consider these types of events. You may be already doing events, and maybe all you need to do is start the process of pushing this information out to the local media. And I do have an example of how this works. One of our clients is Home Instead Senior Care. and Homestead Senior Care is hosting educational events all across the country. They are family caregiver workshops on a variety of topics, but one of the topics that they are talking about is Alzheimer's disease. And on screen is a story from a newspaper in North Carolina. Now this story, or I should say this newspaper, used that event, that local family caregiver training event, as a jumping off point for a larger story on this issue. And Homestead Senior Care was featured very prominently in this story as an expert on the topic of how to care for parents, especially parents who have Alzheimer's. And what's even better probably is that our contact information for Homestead Senior Care was in the story. The news story actually directed the readers to go to the Homestead Senior Care Alzheimer's website for more information. And so, again, this is a story that lives online and will be out there really forever. Now let's go on to our third question, which is, what's new? What's happening that's new in your industry, or maybe it's new in your community that you're recognizing? You know, trends in your industry can make a great story, but often the media, the news media, reporters, journalists, producers, they're not going to know about these trends, and so unless we feed them these trends, they're going to go unnoticed and unreported. And so on screen, we bullet pointed a few ways that trends can be stories. You know, one of the things you might look at is, are there unique ways that customers are using your products or services? I remember a few years ago, there was actually a news story placed about how people are using cell phones as flashlights. They did a whole news story on that. So it was a story about a unique way that people were finding how to use their smartphones. There's also fodder or hay to be made, I should say, among supply and, excuse me, hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. There's also hay to be made among supply and demand shifts. One of the things that for Farmers National Company, I mentioned this whole trend of land values and sales trends within their industry, which is farm and ranch land real estate. So you can look at things that are happening within your supply and demand trends. And also there are demographic trends that you might be able to tie into. For example, there is a lot that is written about the buying habits of baby boomers, and so you might be able to tie into those sorts of trends. In addition to selling farmland, our client, Farmers National Company, also manages oil and gas rights for their clients, and so I wanted to share with you an example of how they're tying into a trend right now. We have just pitched a story on a trend that shows that the bonus rates for oil and gas leases are at an all-time high. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is the concept that sometimes in working with the news media, we need to feed them information on complicated topics in a way that makes it easy for them to report the story. On screen, what you're seeing is our online media room that we use for our clients when we have topics that there is background information that we need to get to the media. So we're making it very easy for them. So on screen, I'm going to point to a couple things. In our newsroom for Farmers National Company on this oil and gas story, we have a report on this trend, and we also have a chart that shows the trends, and the media will pick this chart up right from our media room. And so with complicated topics like this, it's important to provide the media with any available information that you have. One of the things I did want to mention to you is that back in our May webinar, we did take an in-depth look at online press rooms. And if you want to take a closer look at that particular webinar, on screen I show you our homepage for our website, which is albertscommunications.com, and we've circled in the lower right-hand corner of the website, which is Learning Opportunities, and that's where you can go to hear a recording of that webinar if you'd like to learn more about online newsrooms. Now, the last question we want to address is, how is my social media presence enticing to journalists? Again, like I said earlier, not a lot of people think of their social media this way, but journalists are often fishing for story ideas, and they often go to social media. They go to blogs, they go to Facebook, they go to Twitter to find trends and sources for stories. Because as I mentioned earlier, journalists are doing more with less. And to help your social media presence stand out, you need to take this into account. And you need to post the type of content that would appeal to journalists. And it's really the same type of content I've already talked about. Post about trends that are happening. Post about new things, new products, these sorts of things that might be appealing to a journalist. And as Danny pointed out to me when we were preparing this webinar, that there are more appropriate times to post than others for newsrooms. Most newsrooms have story planning sessions at around 9 a.m. in the morning and 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And so you want to get your post up before these times, because guess what? Reporters are required to bring story ideas to these planning sessions. And so you want to make sure that you're getting these story ideas out to them in a timely way. And I wanted to share with you an example from our own experience. We had a blog post on the Alberts Communications blog that was written by Katina Gordon, who's a PR specialist on our staff. And she wrote a blog all about how people are using social media networks to track severe weather. Of course, this was done in the spring. We're based in Nebraska, and we have a lot of severe weather in the springtime. And a local media outlet picked this up, and it was the Fox affiliate here in Omaha, and they used Katina as a source for the story. And it was good exposure for us because we position ourselves as social media experts. And so this absolutely does work. My last point on this issue about making your social media presence accessible to the media is just make sure on your website you have all of your links to your social media sites, because your website is where the media is probably going to go first to research your company. And so you need to make it easy for them to follow you on Twitter or on Facebook or LinkedIn or Google+, or even YouTube. So make sure that you're making those links very noticeable and accessible on your website. Now I'm going to conclude just with this piece on how you can make yourself a better resource for your PR team, whether that be an individual on your staff or whether that be a PR firm like ourselves. The first piece of advice is to be accessible. The news media happens when it happens. It's a very deadline-driven business, and so if you accommodate those requests, then the likelihood of you being a source in those stories goes up dramatically. If you're not able to make yourself accessible when the media wants to talk to you, then there's a good likelihood they'll do the story, but they'll go on to your competition, and that's the last thing that we want. So it's important to be accessible when we call, for instance, and say we have the media and they want to interview you, and by the way, their deadline is 2 o'clock this afternoon. So it's important to meet those deadlines. It's also important to provide regular access to your PR firm. So schedule regular update meetings with them, because this is where we're going to hear from you what's happening in your business. What are the trends that we're seeing? What kind of events do you have coming up that we can promote? And when we say regular updates, also make sure you're updating on a consistent basis your website and your social media sites for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. The fourth point is often the news media will want to put a face on the story. So they'll want to talk to, like in the case of Home Instead Senior Care, when we're doing stories about Alzheimer's, they'll want to talk to a family who is caring for somebody with Alzheimer's. And so it's important for you to know that we may need sources to put a face on that story. And so ultimately, you're going to have to help us with that. And again, if we're not able to find those sources, often the story either goes away or perhaps they might go to the competition to source the story. And again, that's not something we want. And then finally, we would ask you to be prepared. And what we mean by that is getting the media interview is just the first part. Preparing for that media interview is very important, and so we'll most likely provide you with message points. These are the things that we think are important to get across in the story, and it's just important for you to take that process seriously and give yourself some time to get your head around those message points and prepare for the media interview, because ultimately the media is looking for an expert source, so it's important to be prepared, and we want you to be invited back. So if you come across as a knowledgeable source on a particular topic, the chances are very great that the media will have you back. The last thing before we get to questions that I wanted to mention to you is that our next educational webinar is on Wednesday, December 19th at 10 a.m. Central Time, and it is a webinar that is titled Likeable, Shareable, Tweetable, Writing for Social Media. And this webinar is going to be facilitated by Jenna Gallagher. She is a PR specialist on our staff, and she's an experienced editor with publications including Harper's Bazaar magazine, and she's a very engaging social media writer. And so I invite you to attend this because I think you'll get a lot of good ideas as to when you're writing posts for Facebook or Twitter or writing blog posts, how to make your content not only compelling, but also such that your audience will want to share it with others. And you can pre-register for the webinar on our website at, the link is right here on screen. It's at alberscommunications.com/learning opportunities. And with that, I will open it up to questions. One of the questions that has come in, and it's a very frequent question that we get from our clients who are starting to pursue media coverage and exposure, is how do you prevent from being misquoted in the media? And you know, there are a few things that I would share with you because this is a pretty common theme. When people are interviewed, they often feel like maybe their quotes were misconstrued or taken out of context. And the first thing I would suggest, and I alluded to this earlier, and that is it's important that you look at your messages. You know, when you prepare for the interview, actually jot out the messages that you would like to send during that media interview, because ultimately you need to go to that media interview with a purpose, and the purpose needs to be to deliver some specific message points. As odd as it sounds, you're not there to answer the reporter's questions. You're there to deliver specific messages about whatever the topic happens to be. So that's my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is it's actually something that I do when I'm interviewed by the media, especially if it's print media. I will often follow up that media interview with an email to the reporter just clarifying some things that I mentioned, essentially putting my key message points into the email back to the reporter, especially if it's a complicated topic, and maybe if it's a topic that has numbers or facts in it, and I think it's important to get that in writing to the reporter. So following up with the reporter in writing via email is a good tactic to use. And then also, this isn't always available to you, but if it's a print media outlet, it could be online or an actual traditional print media outlet like a newspaper, you can ask if it's permissible for you to answer the questions via email. Not all reporters will allow that, but some will accommodate that request, and they'll actually email you the questions, and you can answer them via email. So those are just some pointers on that. Another question that came in, and this is one we get all the time as well, is how can you measure the ROI, the return on investment for media relations, specifically the type of things that we're talking about today, getting yourself into the news? And I'll have to be honest with you. A week ago, I spent a whole day at an international symposium on measuring the value of public relations. So this is a difficult question to answer in just a couple minutes, but I will give you some pointers on this topic. Really, the first thing you need to do is go into your media relations efforts with specific business objectives in mind. You know, every communications effort that you do ought to be to solve or help with a business issue or problem. And so think in terms of, are you trying to drive website traffic? Are you trying to increase your visibility? Are you trying to increase your visibility with specific types of individuals? And going into this process with specific objectives in mind will help you measure against those objectives. And some of the other things I would suggest that you look at with media exposure is look at the number of impressions that you are creating by your media exposure. And look beyond the number of impressions to qualitative measures with your media exposure, such as, are your messages being carried in the news stories? Because if so, then that's a big win for you. Also, are your calls to action in the story? I mentioned that example with Home Instead Senior Care, where that reporter actually included the website for Home Instead Senior Care's Alzheimer's resources. That's a big win because we are actually inserting our call to action into the story. And finally, look at things against your business objectives. For instance, if one of your objectives is to increase your website traffic, are your media relations efforts effectively helping you do that? So those are the sorts of things that I would recommend. And I'm going to ask Joni, who's online with us, if there were any other questions that came in.
No, there weren't any, Tom, at this point.
Okay. Well, I thank you all for attending this webinar, and we are going to send a recording out to all of you so that you, again, can re-listen to it if you'd like or share it with others in your office. And be sure to look at our website and register for our upcoming webinar in December. Thanks a lot, and have a good day.
Bye.